The reason for suggesting this reading was because God doesn't give up. We sometimes retire, we sometimes fail, and there are very many legitimate human reasons why we stop doing what we stop doing. But God doesn't give up, and particularly doesn't give up with his people and with the world in which we are. And I think probably this exalted poetry in a specific context of Israel and its rebellion helps us to understand a general principle in the scripture that God is unable to deny himself, in the words of Hebrews, that he is consistent totally in never giving up and never ceasing to be merciful. Now, that doesn't let us off the hook because, as we've read here, God is clear in both analyzing situations in his word, but also convincing his people that what he has said is true. And so that is why this is not just poetry, this is prophecy, and it's hard hitting prophecy. But just to think about this again, God is maybe not like us in terms of emotions, but God expresses what he feels. I think it's right to use the word feels in terms of emotions we can understand. So here he's talking about what by rights he ought to do, which is to give up to judgment and destruction his people Israel, and yet he does not do that. And that's not because he's a soft touch, it's because he is totally consistent with his own eternal mercy. And so he both gives exhortation in the sense of the beginning verses, but he also says, "My heart is changed within me, all my compassion is aroused." That's not to mean that there's any variableness in God, but that is to say, well, that is the white hot intention of God towards his people. And therefore, he, as sovereign judge, does not carry out his fierce anger, which has shaped the politics, at least of the Middle East, but probably, although the scripture doesn't touch on other nations as well. God is able to carry out his judgments, but in this case, he chooses not to. And the reason is not because he can't, for he says, "I am God and not man." But then he says, "The Holy One among you, and I will not come in wrath." When he says the Holy One among you, he is expressing his plan and purpose, which is to dwell among his people. Right, you say, well, thanks for theology, Ken. Why are you telling us this? Well, because God does call his people to account, and particularly his people, as the New Testament tells us. Judgment begins with the household of God. So God is particularly concerned that he, being the Holy One among you, will actually sanctify and change and make holy the people he's among. But also, he wants to show through his people his holiness. So he does leave survivors. The evidence doesn't come and wipe us off the face of the earth. I seem to remember a certain Church of England vicar went on Songs of Praise, the redoubtable Malcolm Widdicombe. Sister was in Parliament for so many years. Malcolm, when praying on Songs of Praise on one particular occasion, provoked some viewer response or protest. I'm not quite sure which. He was praying for Idi Amin, the notorious dictator of Uganda, and in the prayers for the church militant, he said, "And Lord, please convert Idi Amin or wipe him off the face of the earth." And of course, that's a bit too strong for songs of praise, even then. So remember that God has those options. He is totally powerful, but God moves in mercy to take away judgment. And of course, supremely, when we preach the gospel, we are talking about a judgment and a wrath laid on the Son of God on the cross so that we can receive forgiveness. So that's basically chapter 11. But then chapter 12 goes into the analysis, the uncomfortable analysis of what God's people are really like. And of course, if mission work was just one success after another, that would be great. Whereas, probably, if we tell the whole story, missionaries, apart from tripping over their own good places, trip over the other things which happen in the church, in organizations in which we work. And that is, well, in this case, in Judah, it's unruly. Ephraim feeds on the wind, and God has reasons to bring charges against Judah. Now, God's in the business of dealing with difficult people. And perhaps it's not unusual that we find that Jacob is particularly the one of the patriarchs that the prophet picks on when talking about God's dealings with his people, but personified in the person of Jacob. And we see that it says he will punish Jacob, but then it talks about Jacob's history, as we know from the book of Genesis. And Jacob's history was summed up in this phrase in verse 3. It says, as a man, he struggled with God. That isn't to say that struggling with God is going to produce a better result. But normally it's necessary because we are all a bit like Jacob. We are all in what we're in for what we can get out of it. And therefore, we tend to be people who feel we're entitled. We get cross when what we feel we're entitled to doesn't come about. And including getting cross or our prayers get directed to God in order to achieve the result we think God ought to give us. So Jacob is an archetype of us as well, struggling with God. And it says that verse 4, he struggled with the angel and overcame him. But he wept and begged for his favour. Because on the positive side of Jacob was a man who recognized the value of God's favour, not just as a way of getting what Jacob wanted, but a way of fulfilling his purpose in being there. He wanted to be the heir. So although he got it by hook and by crook, he was eventually someone who knew what he needed, that above all things, not just material advantages, but God's favour in the sense of seeing God and being with God. And it says that God found him. I think it's that way around in the text, as far as I understand it, in verse 4. He found him at Bethel and talked with him there. God chose to have a relationship with this difficult man who, well, the way that old people are sometimes when he eventually comes up before Pharaoh at the very end of his life and say, well, I've lived all these years and they've been bad, but maybe that was just cattle trading. I don't know. But the end of the interview is interesting, isn't it? That the lesser, apparently, this nomad from the desert who's just been brought in as a refugee to Egypt ends up blessing the most powerful monarch on the earth at that time. So here was someone who knew what it was to be blessed, and there was sufficient blessing even for those who had taken them in. And so Jacob did see a change wrought in him by God. And as we think about mission work, whether it's here in Colne or whether it's in Spain or wherever it is, what we're talking about is not just getting things in their institutional cubbyhole and getting people sorted out, but actually God bringing a change which reflects his character in us. That is the end game of someone who becomes a Christian and then wants to follow the Lord Jesus. Now, there are many other things here, and of course, the much more hopeful chapter, as I'm sure you'll remember from your studies in Hosea, is when you get to chapter 14 and that call of God to return, O Israel, to the Lord your God, which we constantly need to think about because Christ saved us, he's sanctifying us, and he renews us by the Holy Spirit. He constantly calls us back, not to just some remembered experience of when we first turned to Christ, but to actually that continued passion for Christ. And that needs to be contained in our preaching. So I won't say any more, as you've already studied this, and it's just as well I didn't come along with my preaching on Jonah, which you can see on Facebook or on YouTube, because I did it the other week in London. So wiped my brow when I said I heard that you were still in Jonah. I thought, well, face all those experts who've been reading up on the subject, but I hope, can learn here from Hosea that God doesn't give up, and he doesn't give up in what he set out to do from the beginning. As Philippians reminds us, he is faithful to continue what he began and finish it, and he will finish it, or even if it's on that day, on that final day, he is still at work, and he is passionate about what he is doing in us and through us. So God doesn't give up on his people, however obstinate and unruly they are, and he doesn't give up on the world that often rejects the gospel. So that's why we're still in Spain. It's now almost 40 years, and we thank you that you haven't given up on us entirely. I think we can say we've been to Calne, if I remember rightly, it was somewhere in the 1980s, probably 1986, when we first came here. I think you still called yourselves Oxford Road Hall, if I remember the letter I got at the time, inviting me. One or two of the people that you were then supporting in Spain, like Ken Stutt, have now gone to be with the Lord. I don't know how far off we are from that. We do have our bus pass, our pension, and so on. But if we're doing things a bit more slowly and than we used to, we're still doing some of the things which the church there has asked us to be involved with. So, with your permission, I will have Alison up here as well, so that she can fill in all the details, which memory loss sometimes makes me forget. Yeah, I press this thing and I go, oh, that's good. Yes. Right, you've got one of those toy things as well. That's great. Oh, now don't you put your head in the way. Come over there. This way. Yeah, that's fine. Put that somewhere on your collar. Yeah, I'll carry on. So this is this is a picture of last year in France, but we passed through France on our way to England on this year as well. And the purpose of this is a conference for workers in Christian assemblies, the brethren throughout Europe, and it's sponsored by CMNL, which is the American equivalent of Echoes International, and the Missionary Service Commission of Canada, which is another Echoes type of structure for the Canadians. But not just those nationalities, because those agencies also support workers who are from nations in Europe and have connections of their own with the assemblies in those countries. So you will, however, note, and I say this advisedly because I'm looking around the congregation as well, that there is a fair amount of grey and white hair in the picture. So what I'm trying to get us to be praying for are long-term mission partners on the field. They may be people who've come up through the churches and we need to be supporting in the different countries, but there is still a need for people who are cross-cultural missionaries to be in Europe, and that is despite Brexit. Brexit actually gave us no advantages in Spain, and now, of course, is a sort of tit for tat between Britain and Spain over tourists and so on. I mean, we win the football, we win the tennis, but well, don't get worked up about it. But the fact is that in those European countries, they're not exotic. They are boringly like our own country at times. It's necessary to have people there as points of reference who are slightly independent of the structures, good though they are, in the country uh, of Spain. Well, now that's just a sort of general picture to say a lot of what we're saying is true of every other European country. But I'm going to divide this into three bits and say, first of all, why are we missionaries in Spain? And the first reason I would say is to glorify God, to lift up His name. And we don't have to do that as individuals, although you read about us principally in the letters we write, but we do it as part of which is there in Spain. So let's have a look at where we are. That's Madrid, the four dark towers of Madrid, which have been built since the 9/11 that was it, 9/11, 11, the Americans always twist it around. Anyway, the 11th of September attacks in New York, but these towers are as large as the World Trade Center, and then more of them, and they're conveniently close to an airport. So people continue to build towers to express their ability and their power and so on. In the background is God's power. That's the Guadarrama Mountains, and it's obviously a winter picture because you've got a dusting of snow there. You can see the scale of the rest of the city in the foreground of the lens. So we need people in cities. We don't just need the sort of Keswick ideal of all being in green countryside. We need people who are actually in the cities where there are vast numbers of people, and Madrid is a boom city at the moment for various reasons. This is our particular district, as you can see, really picturesque. Motorway flyover, which they're trying to get rid of, but every year they advance it and say we're going to be building a tunnel this year, and then it's the next year, so the budget never comes. That is one of the major axes of our district, and then the railway line is another. So I know that you've no longer got a branch line to Hull, but you drive over a high-speed line, and ours is not high speed, it's always breaking down, but it is a route which many people use, and so it effectively divides two districts into which lots of newly arrived people are coming in Spain, mainly from Latin America. There's our church street, and at the bottom you've got railway embankment, and that's got all the crack dens and other places of ill resort, as they say, but really say that this is a district which is moving a lot of money, and not all of it legitimate, and it's a place where people have great needs. So we lift up the Lord Jesus, obviously, if we're believers, consciously by worship. So I introduced the worship group of our particular church, and there's Mum up front there, son just leading into one of the frames of the photo, his wife in the opposite extreme, then there's another couple among the others, and you can't see the drummer. You know, lots of people like to try and put the drummer off the picture, so there is a typical worship group, but led by the Spirit, and does help our times as a congregation. When we meet midweek, we're not as many. We're probably about 85 people on a Sunday, which is capacity for this building, but be 30 on a Tuesday. And the reason for that is that there'll be people coming who don't necessarily come on a Sunday because they're working over the weekends. Just newly arrived people often have the lower end of the job market, and so they have to work when there's work. The church has an expositional ministry. A lot of it goes up on our website, so it's heard beyond the church itself, we're usually about 6 people in the team, and the six vary in how much weight they take, depending on the series we're doing at any time. But please pray for that ministry, very important. We have a lot of churches now in Madrid compared with the 1980s when we arrived, but many of those churches give an emphasis which is not on expositional preaching. Now, I was mentioning that we are there to lift people up, and sometimes we find it difficult to worship the Lord when things happen in our lives which are going to weigh us down. So we've been helping Gift, the girl in this particular photo, to carry on with her studies as a university student. Tell us a bit more about it, Alison, please.
Well, she and her brother, who is also in the picture, and their mother were members of the church that we used to go to in Alcalá, so we have known them for quite a long time. And sadly, 2 years ago, her mum died. The dad has never been on the scene, and so she was a single mum bringing up her 2 children. So 2 years ago, mum died of cancer, and Gift was only just 18 when that happened. And she chose to stay living with her younger brother. There's no other family in the country. They have a guardian in Canada. That's quite a long way away. So she chose to stay living with her brother, but by last September, things were really going badly wrong in the relationship, and she no longer felt safe. So she gave us private help, and she's been living with us ever since. She's studying biomedical engineering. She's a bright girl, and right now she has gone on an university exchange to Lithuania.
So explain that, because it wasn't that she was now running away from us. She has gone to Lithuania.
Yeah, she's been there for about 10 days now, and is gradually settling in, and she'll be there until January.
So do also pray for Gift's brother, David, who didn't get through all his exams last year, despite the certificate he's holding up there. But please pray that difficulty will give the Lord opportunity in his life. So let's move on to other people that we are seeing who are seeking to serve the Lord and lift him up, and particularly mention Tarry here, who Alison has helped to disciple. And what's Tarry now doing? Because we've mentioned her on a previous visit, I think. Yeah.
Well, Tarry just at the moment just has a job to earn her living, and she hasn't managed yet to get a job in her own sphere of work, which is graphic design, particularly website design and so on. So she's just got something which will, pay for the bread and butter. And she does hope later on to go to Bible school, perhaps. She really wants to serve the Lord. She's done a couple of mission experiences in Zambia and on the OM ship Logos Hope. And she's a great example to younger people in our congregation.
Now, for those who have very patiently followed us over many years, we used to, as a younger family, go off to northwest Spain in the summer because it was a bit cooler and we could help with the work there. So a very quick, shall we say, 30-year retrospect and perspective to say that the church which we help with, or the missionaries who were church planting in Ferrol, presently have just built a hostel, or reconditioned a building for a hostel on the route of St. James, so that lots of people who do those walks can now actually come, stay the night, wash their socks, have a shower, do that kind of stuff on their way, and often have conversations with those who are running the hostel. So that's done with a Christian witness intention. And then the church planting has gone on the fringe of Ferrol, which is right in the northwest corner of Spain. So this is the beautiful north coast. I know that you're inlanders here, but this is the beautiful north coast of Spain, which we visited in, I think it was February. The Naron Church is now in what was a bar and a restaurant. And with COVID, the owner ended up with an empty property. They Trevor and Manoli, who were the missionaries he worked with, were moved out of previous premises, and this was the same landlord. He'd had to sort of listen to some neighbours who'd been complaining for years for no good reason. And so he offered this bar and restaurant, which was ideal for expansion. And so here we are having our pre-meeting cup of coffee, and then for many people it was a great way in, because there are many people will know these premises anyway. So that's another step for the church as it grows, and particularly now growing with national leadership. Another thing which lifts up people is actually the renewing of their minds by the Word of God. So we're very strong on trying to donate books which we've published, and to channel them through things like Open Trust, which some of you will have heard of through the Echoes magazine, and also OM, sometimes directly to those who are studying the scriptures and preparing themselves for teaching ministry in the local churches in Spain. Now, that's lifting up the Lord particularly, but building up the work is something which involves people. So Alison is involved with various aspects of women's ministry within Spain. We won't touch on that in detail, but when you get to our stage of life, then you often have a sort of generational double take, and you ask, well, who influences who? And here's an example. Alison, tell us about Jonathan and Sarah.
Jonathan and Sarah, I worked with that when I was working with the UCCF, the equivalent in the university in our city. And they were students at the time, Jonathan studying medicine and Sarah studying environmental sciences. And they were the kingpins of the local group. They were totally committed to the group and sharing their faith in the university. And now, now they're married. Jonathan is an anaesthetist, and Sarah is a full-time mum because they have 8 children. And they're wonderful. Again, bringing up their children to know the Lord. And we had them. We'll tell you a bit about it later on. But they are a great example of a family that wants to be a witness in the community with their children at every stage.
Thank you. So another thing you've followed us through, which is one of those boring administrative details apparently, was actually our Bible Teaching Centre, which dates back to a foundation with Terry Wickham and Ernest Trenchard in the 1960s. And we had to say, well, what's the way forward? Is it as we've had the structure until now within Madrid, supported by a few local churches, or does it need to go into a wider structure? And we did do that. It's quite a lot of extra paperwork, and now there are about 70 churches that are involved. At least they know what's going on in the centre, and it gives us a little bit of more security in sense of if we disappear off the scene, then there will be other people who have the resources in their hands. It will not be necessarily just in the historical original founding parties. So that's been a move onwards. It's been a lot of sort of shuffling of things in banks, and banks can be extremely annoying when they want a particular set of papers, and they want it in a particular way, and they won't allow you to have certain titles to the accounts. I'm sure all of you have had administrative responsibilities, have sweated blood for what seems to be very little. But actually, the aim is to publish, to teach, and to keep archives. And we keep in touch with a number of leaders, and leadership is never easy when churches are very scattered. So those times when we do get together are important. And we've had difficulties as well in our national fund, to which I've alluded, not because we have all the reasons and all the justice on one side, I'm sure, but actually making sure that workers do not lack what they need and the teachers that are supporting have transparent reasons given for the decisions that are made, which doesn't always automatically happen. So please pray for us, because it requires patience and wisdom and grace to keep communications open. Um, Teaching these days also means being recorded. And one of the things we actually recorded on film with the help of our colleagues in the evangelistic organization Red Box were a series of short videos on how to preach with a sketchboard, something which I've done over many years. People are always asking me, so we thought the best thing was to actually have these things on YouTube so that people can reference them directly and have a look without necessarily committing themselves initially, but at least knowing what they're into. Books are still important for a minority. Unfortunately, it's a minority, but we continue to publish books. So here's one on Song of Songs, one on Jesus of Nazareth, Human and Divine, and a commentary on Galatians and Ephesians. So those books go out, and again, as we've already seen, some of them are donated to people. Here is part of the team that helps with the book production, and particularly grateful not just for designers, but also for a text editor who's Spanish, which helps sort out some of the little sort of translations almost directly from English, which still pop up in books which have been text edited over the years. So that kind of thing is really important in order that something which was written maybe 50, 60 years ago is relevant to today's reader. So that's the kind of work we have to dedicate time to. And we're grateful for people overseas who've published our books as well and use them in their ministry. This is a picture from the Dominican Republic. And the last section is about reaching out, and particularly you know about the open air preaching, but Alison, explain why you're standing at this stand in a women's conference. I have to be very careful how I say this, because I was saying a large women's conference, but what I meant was it was a conference with 4 women, which had a lot of people there.
Yeah, well, I'm part of this pro-life group, Christian pro-life group called CIFRA, and our aim is to, our first priority is to help women and families who are in a crisis because they have an unwanted pregnancy, and we are supporting various women who are in that situation at the moment. We're not just in Madrid, but in other parts of the country. But we also try to make the churches aware, because I don't really know too much about this country, but in Spain it's a kind of subject you don't really talk about in church, and not many churches want to be involved. They think it's something that it's not, we're not incumbent upon us to go into that area. And sadly, I also think that many Christians actually don't necessarily think that it's wrong or that it's not God's will to carry out an abortion. So they prefer to sit on the fence, and so it's quite difficult to make the churches aware that abortion is an awful thing, that it causes awful problems in the lives of women particularly, but families as a whole. And and we want to make them aware that we are an organisation available to help. So we inform the churches and try to get them active, because in fact, although we have a nationwide daily helpline, telephone line, the people that actually come to us or end up coming to us are really, they've had contact with other people, maybe in a church where people are aware of what we do. And so they say, oh, I know an organisation that might be able to help you, and they put us in touch. And it's vital that the churches do know and are conscious of what is needed.
In this photograph, the other person standing there is apparently slightly younger than you. Alison, can you explain your thinking behind this?
Well, yeah, I mean, in fact, all of us who founded the organisation are now in our late 60s, sometimes some over 70. So we are looking to renew or to lower the age level of those involved. Natalia is one of our newer members on the association. She lives in Cordoba, right down south. She's Peruvian, but she's extremely hardworking, very keen, and so we're very glad. We do have other younger people who have come on board, but we need more. We particularly need more for will take over the important positions like being the president and the secretary.
Now tell us about the national conference this year.
Yeah, so we had our own national conference, which is quite a step forward.
First.
Yeah, the first one. And this is where that Dr. Jonathan and his wife came, and they were our speakers, conference speakers, because apart from their 8 children, they also had, obviously, they're very keen on children. They're very pro-life. You don't need to say that. But they also lost a little girl because she was born with Edwards syndrome, I think it was, or I mean, she only lived about 3 days. So they know the pain of losing a child. And they came and spoke at our conference. And we came from different parts of Spain, although it was a small number. We represented different areas of the country, so please pray on for the extension of that work.
So the one thing you have left off doing this year is the coffee house. So tell us about the team popped up on this photo.
Yeah, well, this was the team that was working with me until the end of July, and I was leading the team and also the coordinator of all the work that was carried out in the coffee house. But I thought it was time to pass it all over. I've been doing it for 13 years, and it really belongs to the church we used to go to, and I'm no longer in that church, so it didn't really seem appropriate that I stayed on for 3 years after we left the church, but I felt that it's now time for somebody within the church to take on that role. The lady, the Korean lady that you can see in the photograph, is at least taking on the role of running the children's clothes.
Yes, go on to the children's
Yeah,
clothes,
there.
Yeah.
She's doing that at least. She's not taking over the coordination of everything. So, but at least the children's clothes room will continue running.
Now, we will briefly have more contact with this Australian missionary in the purple there, who was one of the people trained in first contact with the North African women, wasn't she? And tell us about the.
She's dressed in pink, but fine. Yes, this girl. This girl is she's called Eva, and she was helping us in the coffee house for about 18 months. She is a trained seamstress, or you use that word anymore? Anyway, yeah. And so she was running a sewing class for mostly Moroccan women, North Africans, a lady too from Equatorial Guinea, but most of them were North Africans, and they absolutely loved her. It became a very close-knit group. I was there to look after the children because they all came to their children, so I was looking after the children while Eva was teaching them to sew. Sadly, it's good for Eva. She's gone off to Galicia, to the northwest, to start a ministry working amongst the sort of artisan people up there. And so that group had to come to an end.
Now, talking about the clothes room, my great desire is that we don't have bags of second-hand clothes stacked up at home and constant sort of tram park. But actually, you are continuing a ministry with women who are likely to need prams.
Yes.
And so on. So explain how it is you didn't get out of it all.
Well, because the CFRA organisation, we promised to help a woman if she decides to continue with her pregnancy, then we will continue to help her with all the things she needs. So often, because many times the reason why they might choose to have an abortion is because for economic reasons. They can't afford it. They don't have anywhere to live. They haven't got a job. And so we would help them to find somewhere to live, provide them with the cot and the pushchair and all the other stuff that they need, and carry on. We have a girl I've been supporting in Madrid for now 2.5 years. She's trying hard, but she still needs a certain amount of support. So I still have to look out for all these things, this equipment, and it does end up in our hall.
Is she the one with the twinsies?
No, another who had eventually had twins, although she had been wanting to abort, and she eventually decided she now has two lovely 18-month-old twins, and we continue to support her as well.
Great. So that's one area of outreach, very important, less seen, and it's one of the reasons why we have such boring presentation this evening, simply because lots of the things and people we mix with, we can perhaps tell you something on paper, but we can't show you pictures. just because we can't take pictures in a lot of circumstances. But anyway, our open air work does continue, and this is the church in Vallecas on a Saturday morning. For about 15 in the team, often out in the entrance of the station. There we are. That's what a modern station looks like. So it's a coming and going point. Lots of people there and lots of religious groups trying to get their oar in. So it's sometimes a training ground for people to learn to speak to others. And through that, we have people who ask questions and have conversations and sometimes turn up at church and sometimes come to know the Lord. So tell us about this Peruvian lady standing in the baptismal pool there, Alison.
Yeah, she was a lady who was contacted outside the station. She Peruvian, as Ken says, she's 82. She was quite strongly Catholic to begin with, said she wasn't ever going to change her religion, but she started coming to church and just stayed and stayed and stayed. She eventually did a discipleship course, and she asked for baptism. So here she was being baptized earlier this year with her family present.
Yeah. And now we've often mentioned sort of the cultural things that we do, which is sort of low level evangelism, but very necessary because there are certain groups of people that you don't meet on the street and you don't get into any meaningful level of conversation without doing some groundwork. So the George Borrow tour in Extremadura, what did that involve? Alison is a newly arrived member of the George Borrow Society. I'm not twisting her arm, really.
We accompanied and Ken organised the trip, going around a few sites that George Borrow visited it on his journey through Spain, in which he described in his book The Bible in Spain. So they came and we showed them around with the help of a university lecturer. And obviously with the title like The Bible in Spain, it gives rise to talking about why George Borrow was there, what he was talking about, the Bibles that he was distributing, and why it's important to give people the Bible.
So another part of our archive historical work is to keep alive the memory of evangelicals, sometimes, as in the case here, actually having monuments raised to them years after they had apparently been gone, buried, and forgotten by a town council. This particular patch is just in a corner of a graveyard in Catalonia, and this was going to become the car park. But actually, it's known that in this patch, all the people who weren't members of the Catholic Church were buried, among them the evangelicals. And so George Lawrence, who was one of the first missionaries in that part of the country, is buried there together with other people that he served in that town. So eventually, town council was persuaded to set up a marker and some symbolic crosses. And the guy in the group with the green folder does tours of the town, showing how Lawrence influenced the town in the 1880s and 1890s, and his daughters afterwards in Barcelona. This is another cultural activity linked with the Salamanca University, where we started as a family a special collection, but through the help of the member of staff you can see on the right there. She's called Miriam. Miriam is the daughter of an Australian missionary, and she opened the doors up for that arrangement with the university libraries to be set up. Alison, tell us about Ancladas.
This is a project of the lady on the left, yes. She lives in Salamanca. She's French. She's married to a Peruvian, and she wrote several volumes of Bible study material for women, but not just ordinary Bible study material for women to do on their own at home, but a whole course that has been running online with women in Latin America and in other parts of the world. And she wrote the course in English and in Spanish, or it was rather in English and then translated into Spanish. And I have been working alongside correcting the text both in English and in Spanish. It is now going to be published in book form, again, several volumes. So she keeps sending me chunks of text or chapters or modules, and I check it and send it back to her.
Thank you. And why are you involved in Pakistan, Alison? I thought we were in Spain.
Well, no, I'm not involved in Pakistan, except that again, another thing I've been involved in for quite a long time is helping this lady. I don't know whether anybody's heard of Sajda Iqbal. I mean, she is known in England. She set up a ministry in Pakistan called Noor Ministries, and it has its counterpart in Britain called Noor Ministries UK. And she has founded 3 schools in the Punjab area for Christian children who would otherwise be discriminated against. They would end up just having to work in brick kilns and things like that. And so she's established these schools. And so she often resorts to me when she's writing her newsletter for the English community, or anything that she's writing in English, she asks me to correct her. At the same time, she's also studying for a PhD with an American university. So I've been helping her with that. Again, writing in English. Her English is in fact very good at spoken English, and most of her written English as well. That does need a little, touching up here and there.
So you're going to visit her possibly in March.
Possibly, I'm going to visit her in March just to strengthen the link, because it's a number of years now since I've been helping her, and she invited me to actually go and see the schools and see how they work together.
Yes, she doesn't know yet, but she'll be giving various conferences while she's there. Anyway, that's Saturday. And then there is your involvement with the group that uses the Women Suffering Violence Day to actually have a Christian testimony. So what was this banner about?
Well, this is just a banner that we made because we do go out on the street on the 25th of November. As the streets of Madrid are full of feminists and railing against men, and men are awful and things like that. So we go out with a message of the gospel. We say, yes, of course we are against violence perpetrated against women, but we want to say that the problem is the problem of human sin, and that the answer is the radical answer is Jesus. So we go out there with it. We have our banner, which says that we're evangelical Christian women, and we have somebody come and preach the gospel in the centre of Madrid, right down near where Ken used to be preaching.
So that's great. And please remember, Thursdays we go out in our own local town. Although we're not usually a group quite this large, we had a group of American students join us on one particular occasion. And please pray for the family. We're very grateful to have my son Tim back from Singapore with his wife, Carly, and their 2 children. And of course, we have Esther and Lynn in Switzerland. So we've used, we've been used as babysitters more recently since April. It's great having Tim back, but with looking for new jobs in Europe and Tim's decided he needs a career change at a time of rethinking his values. Pray that God, by His Spirit, will help Tim rethink the gospel. So that's the family, and we're grateful for them.